Hi, Tom March here. This is another in the series of quick and dirty WebQuest tips, and I thought perhaps it'd be helpful to give a little bit of my background and early experiences in developing the WebQuest. So that's what this video will be about, a little guided tour of some of the early and maybe significant WebQuests, and as a way to intrigue and probably whet your appetite for things that you might like to try or some things that might give you some inspiration. All right. So I started out in the late 80s as a high school English teacher in California. And during that time, I was always trying to make learning more authentic and realistic for students, mostly through integration of technology and providing avenues for publishing students' work. During that time, around sort of 1990, two colleagues and I developed a school within a school at our high school where we had applied technology, science, and English students in 1 year level combined. So we had about 90 to 100 students across the three classes, and we'd pool them together and do project-based learning where science and technology and English were integrated into the solutions and the projects that the students completed. So that was pretty exciting, and that was a way for us, and myself in particular, to sort of learn some ins and outs through mistakes, trial and error, strategies for helping motivate students to do that kind of more authentic group work. In 1995, I was fortunate enough to get a fellowship at San Diego State University, from which I just sort of got my master's and was doing some teaching in the pre-service and the educational technology departments. At that same time, Bernie Dodge wrote an article called Some Thoughts About WebQuests. And that was the spark that started everything going in those early days. And in my role at the fellowship, we had a great opportunity basically to do whatever was helpful for teachers, students, and librarians. And so WebQuest became a big part of that. And I used each opportunity to explore what made good WebQuest topics, resources, strategies, scaffolding, things like that, until I finally sort of came up with my slightly tweaked version of a template. And we'll see that in one of the other videos. But besides WebQuest, that and more, just a little graphic there for film mentality on that fellowship. That was one of the sort of more popular things that we did. Many who were in those online teaching experiences in the early 2000s would have used film mentality to gather links and develop web-based learning activities like topic hot lists and WebQuests, and have them posted immediately to the web. So that was a pretty cool thing that we did. And I felt really pretty honored to be able to work with my teammates, Linda and Jody, on that. But that sort of tips towards the and more part of it, because WebQuests are really great for problem-based, project-based learning and higher order thinking. But, we do a lot of other kinds of learning in classrooms. And so that's where I rounded out the notion of online learning strategies to expand beyond just the WebQuest. And why do it now? Well, sort of the time is right. Obviously, there's more need and interest in remote and distance learning right now out of necessity because of the virus. And I'm at home, able to sort of jump in and do some of these things. So this is Quick and Dirty WebQuest Tips series is literally that. Production values aren't huge. I'm probably not going to edit this video too much. You'll see me chatting here and flipping through some web pages after this initial slide. So let's take a tour of WebQuests. And as I mentioned early on, some thoughts about WebQuests. This was Bernie Dodge's first posting in 1995. And with this, he created two WebQuests for the class that I was working with him on. And so the key piece here is this notion of what are the critical attributes. So we'll see this idea of an introduction, task, sources, and learning process, etc., in a lot of the templates. But this was 1995, and really we hadn't sort of tried too many of these, and so that's where I sort of, as not the originator, but one of the original developers of the WebQuest, have sort of found from a teaching perspective and a online learning design perspective a few little tweaks, and that's what we'll see in the one about the parts of WebQuest and why they're there. But let's take a little tour. So, in 1995, I was on this fellowship, and I had to try my hand doing a WebQuest. And the first one I did was this. I chose the topic of China because it was very in the news in the mid-90s, and it was an a not very well-known place, and it was full of sort of resources that we could use. But when I created this, and you'll see it's very much HTML, 1.0 kinds of web page here, that we had some links and I had questions across 5 different activities. And when Bernie saw this, he took a look at it and he said, well, that's good, but that's not a WebQuest. And so, I had to have a penny drop moment saying, well, okay, well, what's it missing that's really key? And as I'll refer to it later, one of the key elements is for students not simply to acquire knowledge or nearly not even just to do higher order thinking, which some of these questions will prompt them to do here, but to actually synthesize, construct, to develop an understanding through that experience. Okay, so these are simply activities in what I would then call a knowledge hunt, treasure hunt, or some people call a scavenger hunt. As a way to illustrate that notion of coming together, bringing information together, a later version, a couple of years later, of a revised version, a new iteration of this Searching for China theme was illustrated by the question, what action should the U.S. take in its policy towards China, right? No one right answer, open-ended question. What we're interested in the students' research and argumentation. And to help them, they had to formulate an opinion that covered these different perspectives. So as a way to understand how we can help scaffold that, I developed a little graphic organizer that I just refer to as a playing field. So, here's the question, and the student team response needs to be on that playing field. So because all these are 6 important perspectives and the students get to rank which are most important, still it needs to be on the playing field. We can't do something simply like economic growth and neglect a healthy planet. Well, this was 1995, 96, 97, and we've sort of seen what's happened with the smog and pollution there. So you can see the real response of what China did was way towards the economic growth side. But this is just a way to help students have a tool to scaffold their higher order thinking. And, there's quite a process here that guides them through making those decisions. But I wanted to highlight that as one possible approach. Another interesting thing when developing WebQuests is you start with a rich topic, a controversial or compelling topic. And this one is the Tuskegee Studies, where we had Black men who were treated for quote unquote bad blood and tested over many decades. But what they actually had was syphilis. And in 1947, even after the cure penicillin was found, the men, the Black men, were still studied but not treated. All right, so this is held up as one of the horrors of experimentation on human beings. And I knew it was a rich topic, but as I started gathering links, I started to see many different groups start to say, oh, well, hang on, our issue is very much like that: flooding, cocaine, Black neighborhoods, concentration camps, gun control. So these different articles here were actually made the claim that our issue is like the Tuskegee study. And so my challenge for the students was to help them really look more carefully and to say, well, people are making that claim, but really, how are they different? So here are some elements, some key questions, right? And then the students would sort of work through that other issue and see, do they match up or not? Okay, not that you need to do it this way, but it's simply saying, be open to what you discover as you're gathering links, and then how to help students move into that analysis and synthesis generally emerges from what you find, but I'm highlighting a few different approaches because that is the hardest part of a WebQuest. Another related to Black history was this Little Rock 9 Integration 0. And what I wanted to highlight here was another way to scaffold thinking. And I've used a number of what I call thesis builders. So the students put in their opinions here and it will generate a thesis statement for them, right? So you can see that that's part of the thesis builder, and that's a whole nother website. And I'll probably talk about that because it's kind of a nice scaffold as well. Now, one of the things that I think you will find, if you have not already, is that when you are gathering links, you'll find some that are just so powerful or interactive or modeling or rich because of visuals, something that makes you go, wow, that will be the core of what we work on. So in this regard, this was a web quest called Look Who's Footing the Bill. And I sort of used these sort of Monopoly-esque caricatures out of clip art, but came across this budget explorer that a gentleman had posted online. He was a developer, and he just put that up for the edification of people everywhere. But it was so powerful that it allowed allows anybody, but allowed students in this regard to choose what percentages of the national debt in the budget would go towards different areas, right? And they had to argue and then decide, was it going to go towards surplus or deficit, and then make some arguments as to the benefits for that. Okay. And then finally, do some real world feedback by getting in touch with their congressional representatives. Skip that one. So, through the course of building these activities, there's Bernie Dodge, where we met up at the NEC conference in 2005. And I guess I mentioned that because I moved to Australia in 1997. And not that we didn't try, we did some online courses and did some different projects together, but life was just too busy, his and mine and my own life. So we ended up sort of going in parallel directions, staying in touch with each other, but really, his work was his work and mine was mine. So if you're a devotee of Bernie Dodge, and he certainly deserves them, he's an outstanding educator and professional leader. By all means, go for it. But I don't think there's any loss in sort of comparing ideas and seeing what works best for you and your students. And I mention that because in 2003 and 2004, I wrote an article for educational leadership called The Learning Power of WebQuests. And in that, I sort of developed more of the things that I had learned. And, when you publish an article in a big journal like that, they're going to limit your words, which makes sense, right? But I wanted to cover everything. So I published the full article that I submitted to them and I called it What WebQuests Are Really. And in that, I highlighted the key elements. And the first being this sort of litmus test that you can always use. When someone says something's a WebQuest, just query whether students could copy and paste their way to an answer. And if they can, it's not a WebQuest, okay? It has to prompt students to transform information into new understandings or construct meaning. So what I developed was a updated definition, and it's pretty big and verbose, but what it does is it allows us to take a look at the full picture and the full sweep of what we're looking at. And so let's just take a read of that, and then next videos and little tutorial tours, we'll take a look at this and unpack it. So by my understanding, after having developed WebQuests for almost a decade, was that a WebQuest is a scaffolded learning structure that uses links to essential resources on the World Wide Web and an authentic task to motivate students' investigation of a central open-ended question. Right? That's key. Development of individual expertise and participation in a final group process. It doesn't necessarily have to be group, but it needs to be a synthesis process that attempts to transform newly acquired information into a more sophisticated understanding. Right? So that's the definition. But I added this little tag because it's quite easy and it really makes a difference. I said the best WebQuests do this in a way that inspires students to see richer thematic relationships, facilitate a contribution to the real world of learning, and reflect on their own metacognitive processes. These are simple tweaks that you can do in developing a WebQuest, and it just makes such pedagogical sense that it seems appropriate to put that into the definition. So again, we'll take a look at this in a next video where we're looking at the parts and the purposes of a WebQuest. So thanks very much, and I hope your day is going well. Cheers.